this is a community that suffered from sort of systemic racism and oppression. First as through slavery, and now through being forced to sort of live in the shadow of these horrendous chemical plants.
Welcome back to Kendal Mountain Festival, our short films from this year's event. I'm joined now by Demi Taylor, who is part of the team behind a film that we showed earlier in the festival called The Big Sea. Now, Demi, welcome. It's so exciting for us to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Helen. It's really lovely to be here. It's our first Kendall.
And your film, I saw your film for the first time during the festival, and I have to say it was one of the most challenging but thought-provoking things I have seen in a long time. So for those viewers at home who haven't seen The Big Sea or heard about it, just give us a summary of the film.
Yeah, so The Big Sea, it's an environmental documentary, and it explores surfing's hidden relationship with a place called Cancer Alley, and our toxic relationship with neoprene, which we as surfers use every single day with our wetsuits. Wetsuits really are sort of the poster child for the neoprene industry. It might not be the largest player in the industry, but it's definitely the one that I think everyone thinks of most, right? When you hear the word neoprene, everyone just goes, oh, wetsuits. So we're almost using surfing as a vehicle for change to talk about bigger issues like environmental racism, social justice, greenwashing, and corporate responsibility.
Yeah. So let's just go into a little bit more detail about Cancer Alley. So, where is it, and just describe what's happening in that part of the world?
Okay, so Cancer Alley is as it sounds. It's been given that name because it's a corridor that runs between Baton Rouge and New Orleans in Louisiana. It runs along the banks of the Mississippi. It's home to about 200 of the worst petrochemical factories and industries that you can imagine. The very worst one is the factory that we talk about, which is the Denker plant, which produces something called chloroprene. So that sort of gives you a little indication in terms of what's produced there. All the factories there, well, the majority of the factories have risen from the site of former slave plantations. Obviously, Louisiana, it has a pretty toxic history, one of racial and social injustice. And I think that's what makes this story feel even worse. This is a community that suffered from sort of systemic racism and oppression. First as through slavery, and now through being forced to sort of live in the shadow of these horrendous chemical plants.
Yeah, and having seen the film, I mean, I became aware of this topic probably about a year ago, and was aware of the subject matter, but actually seeing it on screen and some of the visuals in that film. I mean, this isn't a small factory. These are immense plants belching out smoke and flames and toxins, and it really brings home what these people are facing when you actually see it on the screen.
Yeah, and I think it's really horrendous because as you say, it's a huge, sprawling industrial estate. I think the closest you could imagine here is if you were sort of up in, Tynemouth, and you see all those huge plants with flares being lit where they're burning off chemicals. And right on the fence line of the Denker plant, this huge chemical plant, is actually an elementary school. There's 800 children who go to that school. And the people who live in the community there, they call that their ground zero, because that's where the highest concentration of emissions actually are. And it has the greatest impact on children. So obviously, your body is still developing, you're still growing, and cancer risk is due to it's an accumulation. So when you have something like a toxin which is contributing to something like cancer, it is an accumulated risk. So you can obviously imagine if you're breathing that air from the age of, well, from the moment you're born to the moment you die is going to come around a lot more quickly.
And in the film, I know you share a lot of expert advice and also a lot of statistics. I'm going to test you a little bit, but are you able
Ooh.
to give the viewers any kind of statistics from that which do explain that kind of cancer risk for the people living in this factory.
Yeah, so I think the most profound statistic for me is that the cancer risk to the community living around the Denka plant, so living in the shadow of that horrendous petrochemical industry, it's 50 times the national average. And the EPA, so that's the Environmental Protection Agency, brought out a report nearly a decade ago which linked that heightened risk directly back to this chemical plant. So it's with proven science and proven fact that actually there is this absolute tangible link between this chloroprene plant and the heightened risk that the community is facing.
And for people watching at home who might think, well, you know, that's in America, it's a factory in a different country, so how does that affect me? Is it right that the chloroprene, which we call neoprene in our industry, that is used in wetsuits for surfing and my sport, triathlon, that's all made in that factory in Louisiana?
Yeah, that's right. So we've actually become unwittingly like neoprene experts. We were three surfers from the UK who stumbled upon this story and sort of did a really deep dive into it. And there are different grades of neoprene. You need a different grade to be able to produce neoprene for wetsuits. So there's only one company that really produces that grade, and that company is called Denka. They have two plants in the world. One is in Louisiana in Cancer Alley, and there's another in Japan. Now, whereas in America, they've actually done an air toxic assessment, in Japan, they don't classify chloroprene as a known carcinogen, whereas they do in the United States. And just to put that into context, the state of California, because they understand the carcinogenic nature of neoprene in terms of its production, the state of California actually requires surf shops and wetsuits to carry a swing tag that says this is made of a hazardous known carcinogen. So just to put that into context, and then in another country, they don't classify it as a carcinogen. So yeah.
How difficult was it for you to make this film? Because you and the other people involved in the making of this film, who I met earlier in the week, and they're all fabulous, passionate people, but you are surfers. So how difficult was it for you to go into this topic and actually go out and, I'm guessing, visit these people?
Yeah, so we're kind of a core team of three, really. There's myself, there's Chris Nelson, and Lewis Arnold. And as you said, we are all lifelong surfers. I think when we heard about the story, we were absolutely horrified. I went into my shed, I opened it up, I looked in my shed at how many wetsuits I own. I had about 25 in there. So at that point, I went, okay, however hard this is to swallow, I'm 100% invested in this story. I felt personally responsible that I had contributed in some way, unwittingly, to what was going on. I think very often there's a disconnect between the products we buy and actually how they're made. So, yes, it wasn't an easy film to make. For a number of reasons, sort of emotionally, it's a heavy story to carry, but it's not as heavy as actually living in the shadow of this plant. So I think you're always given a reality check about whatever challenges you're facing as a filmmaker, whether that's a headwind from our industry. It's nothing in comparison to actually what's being experienced by the community there. It wasn't an easy story to tell. The surf industry that we've all worked in various capacities, Lewis is a photographer, Chris and myself, we're writers, we're filmmakers. We also run a surf film festival in which we really work with brands and people from the surf industry and have done, over a sort of a 20 to 30 year career. And it was challenging to have those difficult conversations, perhaps, with people who'd been our friends and peers, telling people a story that they really don't want to hear. Everyone's having a comfortable life, making products. You take someone this story, you assume they're going to have the same reaction as you, which is one of horror, one of culpability, and one that questions what you can do. And really, we weren't met with that. And that surprised me. You know, we actually thought that this was going to be a film which had a happy ending. We and I think our naivety is one of the things that's really helped us through this process. You know, it's kind of kept us going because we've been so hopeful. We've always been hopeful for change. Yeah, I think we genuinely thought we'd have a conversation, and if brands were using neoprene as opposed to the natural alternatives that are out there, we assumed they were doing it through lack of knowledge, you know, not understanding the connection. But there were plenty of brands out there who'd been given this information by their industry peers and had just chosen to ignore it because it was an inconvenient story. It's inconvenient because it affects sales figures, it affects your bottom line. Nobody likes change. And I think we found, surprisingly for us, for an industry that's supposedly born out of a counterculture, surfing really doesn't like change. It really likes to dig its heels in. It's a very tight community, surfing, which is both to its benefit. It means that people sometimes spoke to us maybe unthinkingly and were quite honest about the situation, people within the industry. But it also means that it's a very tight club, a boys' club, an old boys' club, an old white boys' club. So you're up against a lot of barriers, and you're up against people who really want to control that industry and really not perhaps admit any culpability.
And I mean, you do this really well in the film by showing images of surfing and people enjoying that healthy outdoor ocean lifestyle. And then flicking back to interviews with people in Louisiana, in Cancer Alley, who are struggling with such hardship and losing loved ones and battling to kind of get some kind of awareness of what they're going through. And you talk a lot in the film about greenwashing as well, and how, you know, people that surf and enjoy that lifestyle don't want to be associated with, you know, a product which is causing cancer, which is, you know, you talk about the racial element as well. It must be, you must have had a lot of doors slammed in your face, I'm guessing.
I mean, yeah.
You've toughened up,
You
right?
know what? My nose is still reeling from it, you know. But yeah, we have had a lot of doors slammed. And I think the greenwashing you touch on is probably endemic, you know, throughout the adventure sports industry. So the greenwashing that you mention is there's neoprene, and then the industry brought out a term called limestone neoprene. And by couching it in a word that sounds environmental, sounds like it's connected to nature, makes it appear to the consumer that this is indeed a green product and nothing to do with neoprene. They pretend it's nothing to do with being a chemical, a petrochemical product. But it's just simply not true. And that people were actually missold this. You know, they were sort of lured in by marketing terms like eco, sustainable, green, alternative. And when we actually looked into the science of it, there is no chemical difference between neoprene and limestone neoprene. And we actually speak to a chemist in the film, which I think you remember. And she's incredible. She's a chemist. She's also a big wave surfer. So she's, again, very much embedded in the industry. But I think the thing that I find upsetting is that we're all really trying our best, aren't we? I think most of us, we really want to do the right thing. And if we have something signposted to us as a sustainable and green alternative, I think most of us are going to want to make those choices, right? And so it's really difficult, and it makes it incredibly difficult to U-turn when surfers have actually been missold this limestone neoprene as a sustainable choice. You know, we found talking with our friends about this, and they went, "Oh, it's okay. Mine's not neoprene, mine's limestone. I've bought something sustainable." And they paid a premium for that. So yeah, so I think when we talk about greenwashing, that's really the stuff that we're looking at. We're really trying to call on brands to really make sure that their actions and intentions match their marketing copy. Because something might sound really nice, but it has to match that on paper.
I almost want to talk to you more about the film because there's so much in there that's important, but I really would encourage people to go and watch the film.
Yeah.
So, Demi, let's flip it a little bit.
Okay.
So, tell me about the alternative. What is there that's a better option? Let's try and look at the positive way
Yeah,
forward.
and I think that this is really what we genuinely want people to take away from this. I think when you think about how many problems we're looking at in the world, and I'm not saying this to bring everyone down, but I think some problems almost feel insurmountable. So mentally, you kick them down the line. You think, I can't affect that change. There's nothing I can do. But this is one of those brilliant situations where there actually is a viable alternative that's already on the market. You don't have to stop surfing. You don't have to stop doing triathlons. There's a natural rubber out there. So it literally grows on trees. I mean, we couldn't have written the script for this, like when you're making a film and you're looking at a story, we just went, well, this is the uptick. This is the happy ending, right? It's called Ulex. It's FSC certified. It's sustainable. They work very much with small holdings. I think one of the things that people think about when they think about rubber plantations is people have been saying to me, but is this a monoculture? Are they cutting down forests? No, because it's FSC certified. They're absolutely not doing that. They're not going out there and destroying habitats. They're working with smallholders who are simply sustaining themselves and their families. Yeah,
So, Ulex is a natural alternative to chloroprene,
that's
neoprene,
correct. Yeah.
and it's available on the market now. I believe was it Patagonia that first started using it?
It was quite interesting actually. Patagonia put out an advert maybe about a decade ago, and I think it was about limestone neoprene, and they said, oh, there isn't a sustainable alternative to neoprene. And a guy called Jeff Martin, who's a material scientist, saw this and went, and he'd been in the rubber industry for some time, and he was like, challenge accepted. He kind of went, you know what? I think I can work on something which will be a good alternative to this. So he pitched it to Patagonia, and they worked together to produce this Ulex technology. And then Patagonia, being Patagonia, said, well, let's open source this. Like, we don't want to keep this to ourselves. Let's share this with the world, because actually everybody needs to make change. And they were doing this from the position of carbon footprint. They hadn't yet made that connection perhaps to Cancer Alley and the human impact as well that it was having. They were simply looking at carbon emissions. So that's how Ulex began, and it began in the surf industry, and it was quite a slow start at first. I think, like with everything, with every new material on the market, you know, it probably goes through a little bit of growing pains. It's never going to be perfect the first time, is it? Like anything you think about. I even think about, the wetsuits I was wearing like 10 years ago. There weren't very many women's wetsuits on the market. They rubbed, they weren't warm enough, they just hadn't really thought it through. So it's always a learning curve. Whereas the Ulex that's available on the market now, and that so many other brands are using, it's just as stretchy. It performs just as well. It's as warm. It's as long lasting. Because I think we touched on it in our screening. As surfers, we treat our wetsuits horribly.
We're really
we
bad to them.
we do things to our wetsuits that you shouldn't do. We stretch them out of shape. We stamp on them in the car park as we're pulling them off. We wee in them in the sea, and then we sling them on a clothesline, cook them in the sunshine, even though they say don't leave in direct sun. We're horrible. And yet our Ulex wetsuits stand up to this test. And we went, actually, what a great showcase for what this natural rubber can actually do, because we're demanding so much of it. Whereas if you think about everywhere else that you see neoprene used, you could probably go through your luggage that you've got with you. Whether if you've got a laptop case, it's probably neoprene. If you've got an eye mask, it's neoprene. If you've got wellies, they're probably lined in neoprene. The minute you understand that neoprene is a substance, it's NLP. You see it absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
But all of those uses, They don't need it to be this hard wearing substance. They just want something spongy. So it's a really easy swap.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of Ulex, it's available on the market now as wetsuits. I know that Patagonia, obviously, Finisterre are using it. Are there other
Yeah.
brands that you're working with or that you're
Yeah.
aware of?
So I think when we started the project, there were 4 brands that used it. Obviously Patagonia, Finisterre, as you said, Oxbow, which is a French company, and Sia, which is a small, sort of quite independent, female-focused brand from the United States. We've been really heartened, actually, although it has been a challenge and we've had a lot of doors slammed in our faces. We know that the campaign that we've been running alongside the film has actually affected change. You know, there are about 20 other surf brands who are coming online who are using Ulex. Admittedly, some of them it feels like it's a box ticking exercise at the moment. They've maybe produced one line of sustainable wetsuit alongside their slew of horrible, toxic, neoprene. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And actually, not every conversation we had was negative. We spoke to a really small Dutch brand, Wallian, reached out to us I think it was maybe about 18 months ago, and they said, "We've heard about this film. Can you tell us a little bit more?" And I think perhaps that's where we differ from traditional documentary filmmakers, because we've really worked to try and take the industry with us, as opposed to creating this sort of expose, which is then going to blow up this industry, which would have been a really good story, right? But as you know, industries don't respond to that. And actually, we really wanted this film to make change. That has been our driving force throughout. Wallian came to us. They were using limestone neoprene. We had very long discussions with them about the true cost of limestone, about the fact that it was actually no different to a traditional petrochemical neoprene. And they committed there and then to absolutely 100% wholesale shift to Ulex. And I went, okay, so that's a small brand with very limited buying power who are going to do that. Shame on you, bigger brands, for not doing that. And then we learned that XL, who are a performance only wetsuit brand, they were probably, before I learned about this, they were probably my favorite wetsuit brand. They were purely performance focused. You'd expect sustainable brands to look for a sustainable alternative, but they have decided that I think by next year, they are also going to be 100% neoprene free. And for us, we went, this is actually huge, because what they're doing with a step like that is they're countering so many of the arguments that have been thrown at us about why natural rubber isn't an alternative. It's just as good in terms of performance. Otherwise, they just simply wouldn't use it. So yeah, so there has been a lot of positive strides.
And I think that's what really needs to happen, isn't it? In a lot of sports, certainly you need the performance suits to be made of it. You need the elite athletes to be wearing wetsuits that are made out of Ulex to really kind of start driving that.
You do, because you know what? We're all motivated by what we see, right? I mean, that's the power of social media. That's the power of marketing. If you do see elite athletes wearing these natural products and speaking to the quality of them, because they are just as good as the unsustainable alternative. But if you hear people speaking positively about them, of course it's going to influence your purchasing decision. We're basic beings. This is how we're getting our information, right? So yeah, absolutely, we do need people to come on board and really champion this, because it's not like you're trying to champion something that isn't as good. It absolutely is just as good.
Okay. I could talk to you all day about this topic, and I think it's really important. So I would encourage everyone to watch The Big C. Obviously, we'll have it on our festival film player. Demi, if you've got one message to give to the people watching the film about how they can help with change in this area, what would that message be?
Don't stop talking about it. Don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations, whether they are with your friends, whether they are with your local surf shop, whether that's communicating with your favorite brand and you're asking them, why aren't you using natural rubber? I think it's just remembering actually that we have the power. We, as the people who are actually doing the lifestyle, whether that's surfing, whether that's as a triathlete, we're really the ones who should be in control, and the brands really should and will listen to us.
Yeah.
We know that they will, that we know that they can.
Okay, Demi, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure
Ah,
to speak
thanks,
to you.
Helen.